Project Cars 3 is a game that's often blamed for the death of its series, with only a mobile game spin-off releasing afterwards, plans for a fourth game being scrapped, and the series developer, Slightly Mad Studios, effectively shutting down and having its staff reassigned elsewhere. When the game released, it was widely criticized for being a sudden departure from the previous Project Cars games despite being a numbered sequel, leading many to simply forget about it and move on not long after release. But a lot of time has passed since then, and because today is the game's 5th anniversary, I think it's appropriate to take a look back and see if it deserved any better in retrospect. Before talking about the game itself, I'll summarize the lead up to its release and the general reception towards it. On December 4th, 2018, Slightly Mad Studios CEO Ian Bell teased a new Project Cars game on the GT Planet forums. He announced later that month that unlike the previous games in the series, which were pretty straightforward and realistic, it would be a spiritual successor to the Need for Speed Shift games, which were focused on less realistic, more casual gameplay. Ian Bell and various news sources referred to the upcoming game as Project Cars 3, but this was just a placeholder and no title was officially announced at that point. In January 2019, teaser images were posted for Slightly Mad Studios' then upcoming game console called the Madbox, and a screen on the front of the console mentioned a game titled Project Cars Revolution. Ian Bell referenced this title in a tweet later that year in July, and in fact, a logo for Project Cars Revolution can be found in the final game files. However, by the time of its formal unveiling in June 2020, the game was officially titled Project Cars 3, which Bell says happened after Slightly Mad Studios was bought out by Codemasters in late 2019, and he blames the name change on company investors in several interviews. That being said, all the marketing for the game, including statements from Bell himself, implied that it was supposed to be realistic like the previous games, despite never being developed that way. This alienated many existing fans of the series, and the game underperformed in sales compared to Project Cars 2, leading to it being largely forgotten after release and any recent discussion of it being pretty sparse. But at this point, everything that happened before release is safely in the past. The game itself is 5 years old, and its last major update and DLC are 4 years old. And looking back on it today is an opportunity to look at it without the same expectations as before. Because of this, I'll avoid comparing Project Cars 3 to the earlier games in the series, as they're fundamentally different types of games that appeal to different audiences. With all of that being said, let's take a look at the game itself. The career mode starts off with a tutorial race in a Corvette C8R, and after that, you're taken to buy your first car from a selection of road-going models. All cars in the game are sorted by class, with the major classes consisting of road cars and GT race cars. These classes all have their own categories of events in the career mode, and each category is made up of 16 events, split across 4 subcategories with 4 events each. There are multiple different types of events, such as standard races and multi-race championships, and time attack modes including Hot Lap, which is a 1-lap time trial, and Pace Setter, where you aim for the best average time over 3 laps. But the most unique event type is definitely Breakout, where you drive around a track and break targets to get points within a certain time limit, and you get bonus points for hitting the targets at high speed. Events reward you with 2 types of XP, one for your driver and one for each individual car you drive. You can get XP by doing things like slipstreaming, overtaking, or driving cleanly, but the main source of XP in career events is through objectives. Each event has 3 of them, and their requirements depend on the event type. Hot Lap and Pace Setter objectives are lap times, Breakout objectives are different amounts of points, Championship objectives are things like finishing at least 5th every time or winning by a certain margin of points, and race objectives can be anything from setting the fastest lap to slipstreaming for a certain amount of time or even just winning the race. I should clarify that actually winning races isn't an outright requirement all the time, and that might sound like a bad thing, but winning gives you more XP, so it's not like there's no incentive at all. And I also just think you should want to win in a racing game regardless of whether or not it checks off a box. When you reach certain amounts of driver XP, you get credits which are used to buy cars and car upgrades, and getting higher levels of car XP gives you discounts on upgrades for that specific car. Completing objectives unlocks more events and event categories. You also have the option to pay credits to unlock events before completing enough objectives, though this should only be used as a last resort, and I personally never had to do it in my playthrough, even while skipping a lot of objectives. That's another thing. You don't have to do any of the objectives in order, and I found the game to be pretty lenient when it comes to unlocking more events, so if there's an objective you find difficult, you can probably just skip it and come back later. As you play the game, you'll get what are called accolades, which are basically achievements for doing certain things, and they give you XP whenever you complete them. On top of the class-specific events, there are 2 side categories called Invitationals and Challenges. Invitationals are special races where you can drive cars you don't own, and challenges are the same sort of thing but with multi-race championships, and you unlock both as you get accolades. All cars in the game are graded by their Performance Index Rating or PIR, and installing performance upgrades will increase that number. There are many different types of upgrades that all affect different aspects of your car, like tires, suspension, transmission, fuel injection, and a boost system that recharges when braking at high speed. The Road and GT classes have maximum values of PIR safe for the top classes of each, and upgrading past the maximum PIR will push that car into a higher class. This means that you don't necessarily have to buy a new car for every category, and you can keep using what you already have and take advantage of upgrade discounts. Many of the road cars also have race modifications that turn them into GT class cars, so you can reuse them this way too. And in some cases it's actually cheaper to do this than to buy the GT car directly. Speaking of buying cars, they can all be bought from the showroom, which has random discounts on certain cars every day. Each car has a certain requirement for your driver level, so you need to have enough XP to buy what you want. But the requirements are pretty consistent with the natural career progression, so you should be able to buy at least most things as you go into new car classes. You can also sell any cars you own to get credits in case you need some. The events tend to have pretty specific car requirements, and many of them only allow one specific model, so it helps to consider event requirements before buying any. This might sound a bit too strict, and you won't always be able to pick whatever you want in a certain class, but it can also lead to you enjoying a car you might not have considered buying. For example, I needed a French car for some of the GTB events, so I got the Alpine A110 GT4 and ended up really liking it, which I wouldn't have done if I could just use anything I wanted. And if there's a car you really want to drive but can't use for that many events, you can go into a custom race and drive any car in the game on any track. They're all available from the start too, so if you just want to set up your own races, you don't have to wait to unlock what you want. In terms of the actual car list, there's over 200 models with a lot of variety. I already mentioned road and GT cars, but there are all kinds of race cars from different disciplines, like Group C, Le Mans prototypes, vintage F1 cars, touring cars, as well as some fictional vehicles such as the Formula X and the Super Truck. As you upgrade cars with better parts, you get the ability to tune them to your liking, and you can adjust things like gear ratios, tire pressure, toe and camber angles, ride height, and downforce. All the race cars have tuning presets for speed and grip, and all cars let you create your own tuning setups and save them in slots. It does actually cost credits to open tuning slots, but it's only 100 credits, which is such a small amount that it might as well be free. On top of performance upgrades, you can do visual customizations on your cars too. You get to customize the paint color and finish, license plate, wheels and tires, and the race cars have their own liveries, and a racing name instead of a license plate. You can choose different color patterns to mix colors and finishes, and place decals on different parts of your car to create your own liveries. You can also save your designs and apply them to other cars. It's certainly not the most comprehensive visual editor, but it's more than enough to make some good designs. Speaking of customization, you have a player character that you can change the look of as well, with different helmets and outfits to combine, and you get to see your driver after a race if you finish on the podium. In terms of tracks, the game has a wide array of real-life circuits, fictional circuits based on real ones, street circuits, and a couple of point-to-point stages, with alternate layouts for many locations. It also has the Fiorano circuit used as Ferrari's test track, which is actually hidden from the track selection unless you choose a Ferrari to drive, and all computer opponents will be Ferraris too. Races can have time progression and variable weather effects, such as haze and fog which lower your visibility, as well as varying levels of rain and snow, which affect your car's traction. Puddles form on the track with enough rainfall, which can cause you to aquaplane and spin out if you're not careful. The car handling itself I found to be really nice. Every car feels distinct, with lighter cars handling better but being prone to oversteer with too much power, and heavier cars being able to deal with more power at the cost of braking and turning capability. It always feels like the cars respond properly, both to your input as well as the environment, which you can especially feel on bumpier tracks like the Knockhill circuit or the Nordschleife. The overall driving model is a more casual one, allowing you to push yourself if you know what you're doing while not demanding too much precision. It's more friendly to people who just want to sit down and race, but it's also not as unrealistic as direct comparisons to Project Cars 1 and 2 would have you believe. You still have to consider things like oversteer, center of gravity, and weight transfer, and if you want as much control of your car as possible, you can toggle assists in the difficulty menu, and turning off more of them rewards you with more XP after completing events. Instead of a typical racing line, there are markers placed around corners that show you where to brake, hit the apex, and start accelerating again. Taking a corner cleanly enough causes you to master that corner, and many career objectives are related to corner mastery, so you want to take good driving lines as much as possible. You don't have to go through the markers exactly to master them, you just have to be smooth and avoid hitting things or going off track. The game supports racing wheels for input, though I don't have one so I can't say how well it plays with one. I used a controller instead, which works great and feels very smooth. The analog controls were more sensitive than I was expecting, and I couldn't find a way to adjust them in-game, but I eventually got used to them and it was never a big problem. There are several camera angles available during races, including a few hood and bumper cameras, chase cameras, and 2 cockpit cameras with adjustable field of view. I'd say the chase cameras suit this game best, especially with the camera shake that you can adjust to your liking, which adds to the sense of speed. There's also a photo mode you can enter mid-race with a number of filters and effects at your disposal. The computer opponents have settings for difficulty and aggression, which can be increased for more XP. I find that they perform worse in the rain and better in snowy conditions, but generally speaking, they put up a fight if you set them correctly, and making mistakes will cost you positions. Next, I want to talk about the graphics, not because I find them super noteworthy, but because they were a common criticism back when this game came out. I will say the graphics aren't the best quality, and there are certain scenarios where the lighting looks a bit strange, but it's nothing that was outright distracting to me, and I had to go out of my way to notice some things that look off. I've heard people compare this to a mobile game, and I'm not sure if they're talking about the in-game graphics or the user interface, but I just don't get where this is coming from. There was a spin-off mobile game called Project Cars Go, which I alluded to earlier, and it was developed by the same company around the same time as Project Cars 3, so I'm sure they shared some assets with one another, but I still failed to see anything mobile game-like about this game. Besides, graphics are more than just fidelity, and I for one appreciate how vibrant it looks, which makes it feel more lively and energetic. Also keep in mind that you're watching all this footage through a compressed video upload, and the game itself looks better than what you're seeing. Moving on to audio, the game has a mix of original and licensed music that plays both in the menus and during races. I like it quite a bit, and while it's not the most memorable racing game soundtrack, I think it fits well with this game's overall tone. The sounds are also really nice, both the car sounds and the environmental details like the rushing of wind as you fly past objects around the track. Now, everything I've been talking about up to this point is single-player content, but Project Cars 3 also has several multiplayer modes and online functions. In the multiplayer menu, there are 3 different modes: Quick Play, Scheduled Events, and Custom Lobby. Quick Play instantly tries to connect you to other players, and puts you in a race with a random car and track. Scheduled events are races that take place at a specific time during the day. You register for whatever event you want to do, and before it starts, you're able to qualify for a higher starting position. These events limit cars by class, so you can choose what to drive in classes with multiple cars, including any upgraded ones in your garage. Custom Lobby allows people to host races with up to 32 players. As the host, you can set the track, time of day, weather, and what cars are allowed, and anyone who joins a lobby mid-race has the ability to spectate until the race is over. For all the multiplayer modes, you have a driving license with a performance rating and a safety grade. Your performance rating increases or decreases based on your finishing position in a race, and your safety grade changes based on how cleanly you drive. To be honest though, the safety rating doesn't really matter, and while there are penalties for cutting corners, like I said, this game is pretty casual, and bumping into other people is pretty much inevitable, so it's not that big of a deal. Your multiplayer stats are supposed to be used for matchmaking, but honestly this game's player count is so low nowadays that it has zero effect. One interesting thing I found is that there seem to be a number of arcades that allow people to play this game in multiplayer with one another. I only found out about this by looking up the usernames of the accounts hosting the lobbies, as well as the fact that I would get kicked from them when I tried joining. To be clear, you can make private lobbies that are either friends only or require a password or invite, so I think the places that have these multiplayer setups just don't know you can do that. Another online feature is the Rivals mode, which consists of time-limited events with online leaderboards. Rivals mode is split into seasons that last a whole month, and during that month, you compete in daily, weekly, and monthly events to rank on the leaderboards. Most of the events are hot lap and pace setter time trials, but there's also a breakout event every now and then. Finishing an event places you in a rank based on how well you did compared to other people. Once the event ends, you get points based on what rank you placed in, and once the season ends, you get XP based on your overall points. I think the Rivals mode is pretty nice. It provides some competition without having to look for a multiplayer race. The last thing I want to talk about is the game's DLC. There were 4 major DLC packs: the Legends Pack, Style Pack, Power Pack, and Electric Pack. They all added new liveries, customizations, new cars, and new event categories in the career mode, with 1 for each DLC pack for a total of 64 new events. I'm saying this in past tense because as I was writing this video, it was announced that the game and its DLC would be delisted on August 24th, which will have already happened by the time this video goes up. And that leads me into actually buying this game nowadays, since even when it was available digitally, it pretty much never went on sale, even on Steam. So regardless of delisting, I'd recommend buying a used physical copy for PlayStation or Xbox. These are the same game as the PC version I've been showing, just with slightly worse graphics and performance depending on what console you use. Also keep in mind that there's no crossplay, so you can't play with people across different platforms. And apparently the servers for the PlayStation version went down back in April of this year, though I can't tell if it's permanent and I don't know if the Xbox servers were affected. Either way, you can find copies for PlayStation or Xbox for around $20, so I'd say to buy it like this. Sadly, it doesn't account for the DLC, but there are less official ways to get it after the delisting. You just have to know where to look. And that's pretty much all I have to say about Project Cars 3. My only real complaints are that the detection for completing certain objectives is hit or miss, specifically the ones where you have to slipstream behind and then overtake another car. I'd say to try doing these at the start of the race, and just keep restarting until you get it. The car list is also a bit underutilized. Many classes are just too small to have their own event categories, so they're relegated to the invitationals and challenges. I feel like some of the cars could have been regrouped in order to have larger classes and categories for more classes. You also can't upgrade any of the cars in these side classes, so the only real reason to buy them is to do visual customizations. And in multiplayer, you can't fill up slots with computer opponents, which makes it tougher to find online races, along with the aforementioned lack of crossplay. Aside from that though, I really enjoyed my time with Project Cars 3, with its variety in content and compelling single-player mode that encourages you to try all sorts of cars. That being said, I don't expect it to change anyone's taste in racing games, so I think your enjoyment of it will depend on what kinds of racing games you like in the first place. If you're looking for a grounded, realistic experience with more emphasis on multiplayer and custom race setups, feel free to skip out on this, as it's just not that type of game. But if you enjoy more casual track racing games with a well-structured single-player mode, I would absolutely recommend Project Cars 3. It's one of the few games of its kind in the past several years, and as people become nostalgic for games like Race Driver Grid and Need for Speed Shift, this is one that's definitely worth a shot. Throughout this video, I think I've been a lot more sympathetic towards Project Cars 3 than most people were when it came out. If it feels like I've been excusing most of its perceived flaws, that's kind of intentional. Many people who covered this game back then were fans of the previous games who were expecting this one to be like those, and who saw its change in direction as inherently bad. And while I don't blame them too much due to how it was marketed, I think games like this can be given a second chance when initial expectations are removed. Besides, the idea of a game being good despite having an unfitting name is far from new, and another good example of that for me is Need for Speed Most Wanted 2012. Despite having very little in common with the original Most Wanted, I really enjoyed it on its own merits, and it's one of my favorite Need for Speed games. I do think games like this can eventually find their audiences as people begin to accept them for what they are, rather than criticize them for what they aren't. And now that 5 years have passed since release, I hope Project Cars 3 can experience the same thing.